What are the chances that ancient Israel's stories of creation might contain scientifically accurate information? The answer would be about zip.
In effect, we've got two creation narratives. Is this a problem?
You never ask of a myth, is it true or false? You ask only one question, is it living or is it dead?
And of course, today's great story from science, we come from 14 billion years of an organic unfolding of the universe.
Creation and evolution are really important topics for Christians to talk about, and I believe in both of them, creation and evolution.
In the beginning, God may have created the heavens and the earth, but not even the Bible is daring enough to claim exactly how it happened. That's why there are two distinct creation stories at the beginning of Genesis, and neither one was ever meant to give a scientific account of how creation happened. Instead, each one offers its own poetic images describing the Creator, creation, and why human beings are the way we are.
Now, if we think of the Bible as a divine product, it's coming from God in some fairly direct or indirect way, if we think of the Bible as a divine product, then the Genesis stories of creation are God's stories of creation. And if they are God's stories of creation, then they can't possibly be wrong. And if you go very far down that road, you may find yourself becoming involved with creation science or scientific creationism or school board squabbles in various parts of the country about whether Genesis should be taught alongside of evolution in high school biology courses. The only reason you would ever think of doing that is if you were thinking that the Genesis stories of creation are God's stories of creation. That's why they can't be wrong. If, on the other hand, you see the Bible as a human product, then the Genesis stories of creation are ancient Israel's stories of creation. And we realize that ancient Israel, like virtually every culture known to us, had its stories of creation. And if we ask, what are the chances that ancient Israel's stories of creation might contain scientifically accurate information? The answer would be about zip. And if they did, it would be purely random, sheer coincidence. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the Genesis stories of creation are profoundly true. But I think they're profoundly true as metaphorical narratives, as symbolic narratives, not as reports of how it really happened.
Well, there are two creation stories in Genesis which in fact contradict each other, which is wonderful. It shows that no one was there. We shouldn't take any of them literally. They all have insight about wisdom, however.
In Genesis 1, the rhythmic unfolding of creation is a step-by-step counter-response to the theology of their captors.
In a world where the surrounding cultures worship the sun, moon, and stars as gods, to claim that your God has created the sun, moon, and stars was a not-so-veiled theological one-upsmanship.
Exiled in Babylon and fighting despair at their situation, the Jewish authors of this propaganda piece were saying, in essence, that our God is better than your God.
Not only were these other gods cast as the creations of the God of the Hebrews, but they were also gutted of their basic functions. The sun, for instance, doesn't actually provide light. Light has already been around for 3 days before the sun comes to the scene. This, of course, also throws a wrench into the literal interpretation of 24-hour days. We've already had 3 days pass, and the sun hasn't even been created yet.
Another one of the clear conflicts between the two Genesis stories is in the creation of human beings. In Genesis 1, human beings are created male and female at the same time. The story of woman being created from man, with all of its patriarchal implications, is a story element used in Genesis 2.
Genesis chapter 1, it's marvelous poetry. When in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. And then we start getting, and on day 1 and day 2, and it was good, and it was good. And it's all very clean, and it's very neat. And you get the animals, and then you get male and female created he, him. Male and female created he, them. Man and woman together. Told to be fruitful and multiply. Splendid. Then you get to Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, and it gets a little bit more messy. Suddenly you find out, here's the human being created, but the animals are created later. And then Eve, the woman, is created even after the animals. What's going on here? We seem to have a discrepancy. The names of God are different. The style is different. The cadence is different. In effect, we've got 2 creation narratives. Is this a problem? Well, it's only a problem if you think there has to be only one creation narrative, if the world can be imaged only in one way.
Which many people feel is the only way to do.
Oh, how narrow.
Yeah.
In the ancient world, in fact, up until the Enlightenment, people looked at this as one continuous narrative. And you can read it that way. In terms of literary criticism, you can read it as a continuous narrative. You can say chapter 1 is foreshadowing what happens in chapter 2. Fine. I like the idea that there are different creation narratives. I like the idea of imaging the cosmos in different ways. I actually hold a joint appointment at Vanderbilt at the Blair College of Music, and I teach a course on the Bible and music with a musicologist. And one of the exercises we give our students, both divinity students and music students, is to say, how do you hear the idea of creating order out of chaos? Well, Genesis chapter 1 was set by Haydn, it was set by Aaron Copland, it was set by Duke Ellington. They're very different, and they're all right. So why not tell the story of creation in different ways? Because the important thing about the biblical materials, particularly in Genesis 1 through 11, this prehistorical dream time that we have, is not the details. Now we have to wonder about, where were the dinosaurs and whatnot.
The unicorn.
The unicorn, and did Adam and Eve know Fred and Wilma? But the general points that are trying to be made here. Let's talk about the order of the universe, the idea that creation is good. And then once we know that God saw that everything was good, and then we find out for the first time when God says something is not good, lo tov in Hebrew, not good. When God says it's not good for the human being to be alone, I'll make a helper. And then Adam gets to choose his own helper, and it's not the animals. What does that tell us about human nature? What does that tell us about partnership? Human to human, human to animal, human to God.
And the 2 stories portray God so differently. I mean, there's a lot of humor in the second Genesis story, especially when Adam says, I'm so lonely, and God says, well, here's the aardvark. Adam has to say, that's not really what I had in mind.
Right, and in fact, God recognizes that the human being is alone, says, I'll create a helper fit for him. And then when you ask most people what then happens, they say, well, so Adam gets put to sleep, and then you have Eve. No. So you have the creation of the animals, and the animals are paraded in front of Adam. And yes, Adam does look at the aardvark and think, absolutely no way. Sheep, possible. Dog, possible. Minor bird, no. Right? But the helper is not found fit for him. So who then is that individual who might complete Adam? There's humor here as well in terms of Adam falling asleep and then God taking from Adam's, the Hebrew is tselem, side, rib, if you will, because it's the reverse of a normal birth process. Instead of Eve giving birth to Adam, here it's Adam giving birth to Eve, but in a kind of 1950s way, so Adam is asleep through the entire process, right?
Ooh, a baby.
Right, ooh, a baby. With God serving his midwife. And I think that's a very nice confusion of gender roles.
So the 2 stories in Genesis come at creation from very different perspectives and motives. The orders of events are different. The feel and style are different. Their points are even different. But they were both important enough to the Jewish sense of identity to be included in the Bible.
For many, not seeing that there are 2 separate stories is simply a matter of having not read the stories since they were kids. But for some Christians, including those who promote the teaching of creation science or intelligent design in our public schools, the idea of an inerrant Bible is so important that they systematically ignore the obvious differences in the text in order to promote their literal beliefs. What is at issue is no less than the way people think, who controls our schools, and who controls our culture.
If you read the Bible metaphorically, the meanings open up and go deeper than simple literal interpretations allow. Unbending readings of the text have led to the Bible being misused to endorse all kinds of social ills, from slavery to war to the subjugation of women. But if you read the text in a way that is alert to the meanings that transcend the literal, you pave the way for deeper understandings.
When you really go back to the myth of the Garden of Eden, and once again, as I said earlier, myth is not something that's true or false. Myth is a description of reality within which we live or which we simply don't live. Therefore, you never ask of a myth, is it true or false? You ask only one question, is it living or is it dead? Now, there's a living myth for me in the story of the Garden of Eden. And the interesting part of it is, as the story unfolds, and it's just a story, and we better not get literal about it, but there's a fruit. The great blind poet Milton called it an apple. I grew up in Southern California. I'm perfectly sure it was an orange. But at any rate, there's a forbidden fruit here in the Garden of Eden, and you're not supposed to partake of it. And as the story unfolds, there's a snake in the grass. Even in this paradisical atmosphere, there's a snake in the grass always. There's a snake in the grass that purportedly persuades the woman, and she persuades the man. And then God comes walking along in the coolness of the evening or whatever, and they run for cover because they're naked. How did you know you were naked? Because our eyes have been opened. Well, God says, what did you do? And the man says, well, the woman whom you gave me, she talked me into this. And God turns to the woman and says, what did you do? Well, I really didn't do this. The snake was in the grass and talked me into doing this. And at that point, according to this wonderful story, God pushes them out of the Garden of Eden. Because God can deal with sinners. In fact, God must deal with sinners. And God can deal with sin. In fact, God must deal with sin. What God can't effectively deal with is irresponsibility. And the moment Adam and Eve reject the notion that they are accountable for their own lives, that they have dominion over their own lives, the moment they reject that, God says, hey, we got a problem. You're not ever going to be in the garden again with that kind of an attitude.
Well, it just seems to me the story of the garden is that God delights in us, and we can't believe it. We can't believe that we are enough. And God's great sadness, right? The first sadness we hear in the Bible is that God's creation is afraid of God, afraid, fearful.
There's a wonderful story by Mark Twain, one of my favorite theologians, Adam saying, I'd rather be outside the garden with Eve than inside without her. That's said at her graveside. All of which says it's the power of that kind of loving, caring, that has to do with what gives life meaning, not whether you are committing a sin or not committing a sin, or feeling guilty or not feeling guilty. Love begins to be the power that overcomes this and brings the kind of redemption we're concerned about, not killing an innocent animal or an equally innocent human being.
The ancient idea of the interconnectedness of all that is beginning to be rediscovered in the modern West, from the sense of oneness with God, with each other, and with creation.
Matthew Fox even suggests Mother Earth as a metaphor for the crucified and resurrected Jesus. Innocent of any crime, she has blessed us for billions of years and is now being killed by pollution. Even so, she rises daily to redeem us, holding out hope for a radical change in the human heart and spirit.
When we pause in awe at the beauty and complexity of creation, there are lots of responses possible. Gratitude, a heightened sense of consciousness, a change of behavior.
Whatever our response, care for the environment is not only deeply biblical and practical, but increasingly critical for both our own spiritual lives and for our collective future.
We should realize how many creation stories there are in the Bible, and how important it is that our Bible begins with creation stories, because that is, in fact, how all tribes begin, with telling their young ones where we come from and where we are. And of course, today's creation story from science, we come from 14 billion years of an organic unfolding of the universe, and we're connected physiologically with every being in the universe. We all share the same atoms and the same molecules. That's truly significant and important at this time in history. We're all kin. We're all interdependent. And that's the basis of compassion, which is Jesus' ultimate teaching.
Creation and evolution are really important topics for Christians to talk about, and I believe in both of them, creation and evolution. At the school, the seminary where I teach, we have what's called the Zygon Center for Religion and Science, where we bring in top scientists from the University of Chicago in a course called The Epic of Creation. They talk about the world being created through the Big Bang and the latest in science, and including stem cell research and everything. And then we lay that alongside the biblical text and the best in theology, and try to help students see there is no conflict between creation and evolution. God created the world, one can say that and still absolutely believe in evolution. And that's wonderful the more you learn about it. I mean, I was trained as a geologist. I love to go to the Grand Canyon and see those layers. It's so exciting to think of all the species that have lived here and the complexity of Earth's history. It's wonderful. One can hold all of that and also believe in God and in creation. In fact, we urgently need to now, because we've got to take care of the creation. And I mean, I would say that's the most urgent issue facing our planet right now, is global climate change. And we've gotten sidetracked into this ridiculous sort of creationism versus evolution, and now with the new sort of iteration on creationism, intelligent design. It's ridiculous to be
spending all our energy on that.
Yeah, when what we need to do is use the best of science and theology to figure out how to care for this earth before we create a disaster in terms of the global warming pollution that really will live with us and with our descendants for generations to come.
The Church has often been slow to embrace advances in science.
Galileo was condemned in 1633 because his teaching that the earth revolved around the sun contradicted the biblical evidence. It only took the Vatican until 1992, 359 years later, to admit Galileo may have been right.
Today, science and religion can agree on the urgency of caring for creation in ways that preserve this amazing gift for generations to come. Awareness and awe of seeing God in all things, and all things in God, continues to be an integral part of the spiritual life.
From the writing of the creation stories thousands of years ago to the writing of our own story today, we continue to explore all sorts of ways to express and experience how the divine reverberates from every corner of creation.